Kingmaker of the Global South, India and the Indian Ocean. 40% of the world's oil passes through it. 64% of the world's container ship traffic crosses it. 90% of global trade by volume depends on it. Sitting directly at its center, controlling every major choke point, every critical strait, every trade route that keeps the modern economy alive, is one country that most of the world still dramatically underestimates. This is the story of India, the Indian Ocean, and the quiet, deliberate, decade-long campaign to become the undisputed power at the center of the world's most important body of water. Section 1. The Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean is not the Atlantic or the Pacific. It does not get the headlines. It does not get the Netflix documentaries or the congressional hearings. But it should. Every year, approximately $20 trillion worth of goods moves across the Indian Ocean. The oil that heats European homes in winter, the semiconductors that power American phones, the raw materials that feed Chinese factories. All of it passes through a handful of narrow straits that a single hostile navy could, in theory, shut down within hours. The Strait of Hormuz in the northwest, through which nearly a third of the world's liquefied natural gas flows. The Strait of Malacca in the east, the narrowest point on the busiest shipping lane on Earth. The Bab el-Mandeb in the west, the gateway between the Indian Ocean and the Suez Canal, and therefore between Asia and Europe. Control these 3 points and you control the global economy. India sits in the middle of all three. Section 2. String of Pearls. China understood this before almost anyone else. Starting in the early 2000s, Beijing began a quiet but systematic strategy that analysts would eventually name the String of Pearls, a chain of commercial ports, naval facilities, and strategic investments stretching from the Chinese coast all the way through the Indian Ocean to the eastern coast of Africa. Gwadar in Pakistan, deep water port, Chinese funded, Chinese built, positioned at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, within striking distance of the Strait of Hormuz. Hambantota in Sri Lanka. A port so financially devastating for the Sri Lankan government that they were forced to hand it to China on a 99-year lease in 2017, unable to repay the loans Beijing had extended to build it. Kyaukphyu in Myanmar. Another deep water facility, another Chinese investment, another pearl on the string. The strategic logic is straightforward. China imports roughly 70% of its oil through the Indian Ocean. It is almost entirely dependent on sea lanes it does not control. The String of Pearls is Beijing's attempt to build enough presence in the region that, in a crisis, it could protect or disrupt those lanes at will. There is one problem with this strategy. India. Section 3. Necklace of Diamonds. New Delhi has watched the String of Pearls expand for 2 decades, and in that time it has built a counter-strategy of its own. Indian analysts call it the Necklace of Diamonds. Where China builds ports, India builds relationships. Military access agreements with Oman, giving the Indian Navy reach into the Persian Gulf. A naval base on the Agalega Islands in Mauritius, projecting power deep into the central Indian Ocean. Logistics agreements with Singapore, Australia, France, and the United States, enabling Indian ships to refuel and rearm at ports across the entire region. India has also quietly expanded its own naval infrastructure. The INS Jatayu base on the Lakshadweep Islands, India's westernmost territory, sitting directly astride the sea lane between the Middle East and Southeast Asia. A new military installation in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, at the eastern end of the Indian Ocean, positioned less than 90 miles from the Strait of Malacca. In 2023, India launched INS Vikrant, its first domestically built aircraft carrier. It was not just a warship, it was a statement that India is no longer a regional power with coastal ambitions. It is an oceanic power with global reach, and it is not doing this alone. Section 4. The Quad. In 2021, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, the Quad, was elevated from a loose diplomatic forum to a full strategic partnership between India, the United States, Australia, and Japan. On paper, the Quad does not describe itself as a military alliance. Its public communications focus on infrastructure, vaccines, climate, and technology. But look at what the Quad actually does in the Indian Ocean. Joint naval exercises, Malabar exercises that have grown every year in scale and complexity. Intelligence sharing arrangements that give India access to American satellite surveillance across the entire region. Infrastructure financing designed to offer developing nations an alternative to Chinese port investment. The Quad is, in practical terms, a coalition built around a single geographic reality. That the Indian Ocean is the most strategically important body of water in the 21st century, that China is attempting to establish dominance over it, and that India is the only power with both the geographic position and the strategic interest to prevent that from happening. The United States knows this. That is why Washington has spent the last decade cultivating India as a partner more intensively than almost any other relationship in its foreign policy. India knows this too, and it is using that leverage with remarkable sophistication, maintaining its historic tradition of strategic autonomy, refusing to formally align with Washington while accepting American technology transfers, intelligence sharing, and defense cooperation that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago. Section 5. The Economic Reality. Here is the detail that most coverage of this story misses entirely. The Indian Ocean is not just a military competition, it is an economic one. India's own trade is overwhelmingly dependent on the same sea lanes it is now competing to control. Approximately 77% of India's total trade by value moves through the Indian Ocean. Its energy imports, its export manufacturing, its entire economic growth trajectory, all of it flows through waters that China is actively trying to shape. This means India is not fighting for abstract strategic dominance. It is fighting for its own economic survival. And that changes the calculation entirely. Because a nation fighting for its economic survival does not negotiate. It does not compromise. It does not accept a status quo that leaves it vulnerable. India will not lose this competition quietly. Closing section. The Indian Ocean will be the defining geopolitical theatre of the next 30 years. Not Ukraine, not the Taiwan Strait, not the Arctic. The Indian Ocean, where 40% of the world's oil moves, where trillions of dollars of cargo cross daily, where two of the world's most powerful rising nations are building the infrastructure of future dominance. One port at a time, one naval base at a time, one alliance at a time. India sits at the centre of all of it, not as a bystander, not as a developing nation asking for a seat at the table. As the Kingmaker, the power whose decisions about alignment, access and ambition will determine which version of the 21st century the rest of the world actually lives in. The ocean has always known this. The world is only now beginning to catch up. If this breakdown gave you something you did not know before, subscribe to Warcast. Next, we are going to the Taiwan Strait, a 100-mile stretch of water that could trigger the most consequential conflict since World War II. That video drops in 2 weeks.